modernity has fixed our minds in the categories of Cartesian rationalism. And so I will not claim, and do not in fact think it's so, that there was anything overtly psychedelic in the sense of pharmacologically based about alchemy. When we look back through the alchemical literature, there's very little evidence that it was pharmacologically driven. Only when you get to the very last adumbrations of the alchemical impulse in someone like Paracelsus do you get the use of opium. And but it is interesting that the great drugs of modern society were accidentally discovered by alchemists in their researches. Distilled alcohol is a product of alchemical work. And then, as I mentioned, opium was very heavily used by the Paracelsian school. But what they possessed was an ability to liquefy their mental categories and then to project the contents of the mind onto these processes and read them back. Now, this is what made alchemy so fascinating to the Jungian school, because the Jungians were discovering the unconscious, and they realized before Jung's involvement with alchemy, the best material for psychotherapy to work upon was dreams, but dream and mythology, and these were the two poles of the data field that the discovery of the unconscious was working on. Well, then Jung had the prescience to realize that alchemy, which to that point, as the gentleman over here said, had been dismissed as a naive effort to turn base metals into gold. This is the first fiction that you have to absolutely purge from your mind. What is being described is what Jungians call the individuation process, a dissolving of the boundaries of the ego, an allowing of the chaotic material of the unconscious to pour forth where it can be inspected by consciousness. And we'll see tonight when we look at this art that these images are full of ravening beasts, incestuous mother-son pairs, incestuous brother-sister pairs, hermaphrodites. All taboos are broken. This stuff just boils up from the unconscious, then is sublimed through these processes, and then is somehow fixed. And this fixing then is the culmination of alchemy. And if you can bring off this trick, then you possess our stone, the philosopher's stone, the lapis, the Sophic hydrolith of the wise, Irenaeus Philolaethes calls it. And there were hundreds of control words for naming the secret difficult to obtain, alchemical gold, in short. This is what we're after. Well, so then this is a phenomenon in the physical world, and then mind is a phenomenon as in the Cartesian distinction, which is between the res extensa and the res virens. This is the great splitting of the world into two parts. I remember Al Huang once said to me, we were talking about the yin-yang symbol, and he said, you know, the interesting thing is not the yin or the yang. The interesting thing is the S-shaped surface which runs between them. And that S-shaped surface is a river of alchemical mercury. Now, where the alchemists saw this river of alchemical mercury is in the boundary between waking and sleeping. There is a place, not quite sleeping, not quite waking, and there flows this river of alchemical mercury, where you can project the contents of the unconscious and you can read it back to yourself. For the alchemists, Mercury was mind itself, in a sense, and by tracing through the steps by which they reached that conclusion, you can have a taste of what alchemical thinking was about. Mercury takes the form of its container. If I pour mercury into a cup, it takes the shape of the cup. If I pour it into a test tube, it takes the shape of a test tube. This taking the shape of its container is a quality of mind, and yet here it is present in a flowing silvery metal. The other thing is, Mercury is a reflecting surface. You never see Mercury. What you see is the world that surrounds it, which is perfectly reflected in its surface, like a moving mirror, you see. So for an alchemist, it makes perfect sense to extrapolate from these internal, what we call internal psychological processes, to external processes in the world. That distinction doesn't exist for the alchemist. And I tell you, the longer I live, the more convinced I am that this is just absolutely the truth. And those of you who really want to get into this, I recommend you read Mysterium Coniunctionis by Jung, the mysterious conjunction. And he discusses the Nigredo in great detail. Another symbol for the Nigredo is the senex, the old man, because the old man is just short of death. And that's the state that the Nigredo makes you feel. Well, then you must take this raw, chaotic, unformed material, often compared to feces, compared to corruption, compared to the contents of an opened grave, and you must cook it in the alchemical fires of contemplation, prayer, and ascetic self-control. And then you will move through a series of stages that are associated with colors. There is the rubedo, the reddening. There is the citrinitas, the yellowing. There is the viriditas, the greening. And the order in which these occurs differs according to who you follow. But then there is closure at the end of the process. Most alchemists, although certainly not all, agree that the higher state is the albedo, the whitening, the purificatio, right? So at each stage, there are sub-stages of dissolution, dissolutio, et coagulatio. And there's one alchemical aphorism that says, dissolutio et coagulatio, know this, and this is all you need to know. And so it's a melting and a recasting and a purifying of psychic contents. Well, then so finally you reach the albedo, the whitening, the highest stage, the stage of great purity. But remember how I said last night that Mercury was always the metaphor for mind in alchemy, or one of the metaphors for mind in alchemy? And I talked about its mutability and its ability to take the shape of its container, and when you shatter it, it then splits into many reflections. So once you move into the domain of the albedo, the whitening, then a whole new problem arises for the alchemist. And this is the problem of the fixing of the stone. Somehow the mutability of Mercury must be overcome, and it must be crystallized. It must be fixed so that it doesn't get away from you, so that it doesn't slip through your fingers. To achieve our Mercury is nothing unless you have the secret of the coagulatio. And if you possess it, nothing else is worth anything, because it is psychic completion, peace of mind. Jung called it the self. It's the self that we are trying to recover